In the heart of Philadelphia, behind weathered stone walls and rusted iron gates, stands a relic of pain, isolation, and dark memories. Eastern State Penitentiary, once hailed as a revolutionary institution for its approach to incarceration, now lies in eerie silence, its long, crumbling hallways echoing with the footsteps of the past. But to many who walk its haunted corridors today, that silence is not empty. They claim the inmates never truly left. Eastern State opened in 1829, the brainchild of a bold social experiment. It was the first true penitentiary in the world, designed not to punish, but to force prisoners into spiritual reflection and remorse. The Quakers who influenced its philosophy believed that solitude was the path to salvation. Each prisoner was locked alone in a small, windowless stone cell for 23 hours a day. The only natural light came from a single hole in the ceiling, called the Eye of God. Prisoners were forbidden to speak, to sing, even to glance at one another. If they left their cells for rare exercise or religious services, they wore hoods to block their vision. There were no visitors, no news of the outside world, no human contact. This strict system of isolation, known as the Pennsylvania system, was meant to encourage penitence. But in reality, it led many inmates to madness. Years of sensory deprivation eroded their minds. Some scratched words and shapes into the stone walls. Others talked to themselves, paced in endless circles, or cried out to voices only they could hear. The prison's early years were marked not only by philosophical ambition, but by psychological torment. And over time, as more stories emerged of men driven insane by solitude, the system fell out of favor. Eastern State abandoned strict isolation by the early 1900s, but the damage had already been done. Decades passed, and Eastern State's reputation grew darker. The prison became overcrowded, brutal, and violent. Murders occurred within its walls. Riots broke out. The echoes of agony and fear filled every corridor. Even after it officially closed in 1971, many believed that something remained, something beyond memory or history. Visitors began to report strange occurrences, distant whispers in empty halls, footsteps behind them when no one was there, and shadows flickering across the walls. Paranormal investigators soon turned their attention to Eastern State, declaring it one of the most haunted locations in the United States. Among the prison's most notorious former inmates was Al Capone, the legendary Chicago mob boss. Capone was arrested in 1929 and briefly imprisoned at Eastern State for carrying a concealed weapon. Unlike other prisoners, Capone's experience was far from harsh. He occupied a private cell decorated with fine rugs, a polished desk, an antique radio, and even tasteful art. It was a luxurious setup by prison standards, earned no doubt through bribes and influence. But even in comfort, Capone found no peace. From the first nights of his stay, he began to complain of being haunted. Guards and fellow inmates heard him crying out in terror, sometimes in the middle of the night, begging an unseen presence to leave him alone. He spoke often of Jimmy. According to legend, Capone was haunted by the ghost of James Clark, one of the victims of the 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, a brutal gangland hit allegedly orchestrated by Capone himself. Capone would shout from his cell, "Leave me alone, Jimmy, get out of here." The guards could never find anyone in his cell, and no other inmates reported seeing anything. But Capone remained convinced he was being followed. He grew pale, irritable, and paranoid. Some say the ghost followed him long after he left Eastern State, tormenting him until his death in 1947. Whether it was guilt, madness, or something truly supernatural, Capone's haunting became one of the prison's most enduring legends. But Al Capone is far from the only spirit said to linger behind these walls. Cell Block 12 is a hotspot for ghostly activity. Visitors and staff have reported echoing voices, disembodied laughter, and the sound of cell doors slamming on their own. Some have seen shadowy figures darting across hallways or peeking from behind door frames. One particularly chilling report came from a tour guide who heard whispering behind her during a routine walkthrough. When she turned, the hallway was empty, but the whispering continued, circling her as though unseen figures were closing in. Cell Block 4 is another area known for paranormal encounters. In one cell, a dark figure is often seen pacing back and forth. Sometimes it disappears through the wall. In the same area, people have felt cold drafts, even in the heat of summer, and have experienced sudden dizziness or nausea with no medical explanation. One visitor claimed to have seen a face watching him from inside a locked cell, its eyes hollow, its expression mournful. The old hospital wing, where injured and mentally ill inmates were treated, carries an especially oppressive energy. Stretchers still rest in the corners, and rusted medical tools sit on long-forgotten shelves. Paranormal investigators who've explored the space report hearing moans and wheezing breaths. Some have caught mysterious figures on thermal camera, shapes too large to be rats, too human to be explained away by light tricks. A former security guard once said he saw a figure dressed in 1940s prison garb vanish into thin air as he turned a corner. Cell Block 15, the prison's original death row, is rarely visited, though Eastern State never conducted executions. This area held the most dangerous and desperate men, murderers, gang leaders, and those driven to the brink. Many who enter the block report a suffocating sense of dread. Others describe the feeling of being watched or followed. One man said he heard his name whispered 3 times in the dark, once by a woman's voice, once by a child's, and once by something that didn't sound human at all. In one corner of the prison yard, a child's ghost is said to appear. No children were ever imprisoned here, but several visitors have described the fleeting image of a young boy in old-fashioned clothes, laughing and running along the wall before vanishing into nothing. A tour guide recalled a moment when a group of children on a field trip began waving at a figure in a second-story window. There was no one up there. The floor was locked. Over the years, countless paranormal teams, TV crews, and psychic mediums have explored Eastern State. They've brought with them EMF detectors, thermal cameras, spirit boxes, and infrared video equipment. Many leave with stories they can't explain: phantom voices saying names, sudden energy spikes in empty rooms, lights flickering without power. One famous investigator said that during a session in cell block 6, he felt a cold hand grip his wrist and pull him back toward the cell. Another recorded what sounded like deep, labored breathing in the solitary confinement wing, though there was no one else in the building. But some of the most unsettling stories come not from experts, but from everyday visitors. A woman touring the chapel said she felt a hand take hers, gentle but firm. When she looked, no one was there. A man taking a photo near Capone's cell saw a white blur drift past his lens. When he developed the image, there appeared to be a faint figure standing behind the bars. Even workers and staff admit that strange things happen often. Lights turn on and off without explanation. Keys go missing. Doors lock and unlock by themselves. One maintenance worker, who had worked there for nearly a decade, swore he'd never enter cell block 3 again. When asked why, he said only, "There's something in there, and it knows who I am." Today, Eastern State Penitentiary operates as a historic site and museum. Tourists walk the same halls that once held the most hardened criminals in America. They marvel at the decaying architecture, the towering cell blocks, the weight of history that seems pressed into every stone. But beneath the dust and decay, beneath the layers of time and memory, something else endures, something restless. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's hard to stand inside Eastern State and not feel the presence of those who came before. The silence is heavy, the air is still, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, you might hear a voice, low, sad, forgotten, calling out from behind the walls. Eastern State Penitentiary is more than just a ruin. It is a monument to suffering, a cathedral of regret, a prison of echoes, and perhaps, just perhaps, a home for the souls that still wander its endless halls.